To the One Thing podcast. It's great to be here with you today.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I'm excited to dive into this very important topic. As I mentioned previously, it's something that I've really wanted to share with our audience. So many people struggle with concerns related to picky eating and just having food aversions, and
Mhm.
it's such a frustrating situation for the whole family.
Absolutely.
So before we get into talking about those details, it sounds like you have your own personal story related to picky eating, food aversions. I'd love to hear that and bring us up to speed as to how you got into this work.
Yeah. Well, I've spent over 13 years working with children and families around feeding. It's always been my passion. Once I discovered that in SLP school, I knew I wanted to be a feeding specialist. And I thought I had all the answers. I thought I was doing so well, I had all these clients, I've seen some success. But then I had my son, who would turn out to be picky. And he was like my biggest teacher, definitely. Because all of a sudden, everything that I've tried with my clients, my patients, just wasn't working for him.
Mhm.
None of that advice, none of the things. And I was really good at getting kids to take bites, but I couldn't get him to relax at the table. And that was a big wake up call for me, for sure. So that's really when I realized there was something deeper to this, and I started to think bigger picture. And I can honestly still remember the exact moment when that happened. My son Nate, he was just sitting at the kitchen island, just his little legs dangling off the kitchen stool. And it should have been kind of a peaceful moment, but it felt very tight. So what I did is I placed a small plate of food in front of him, hoping that maybe this time it will be different. And it was food he's had before, so it was just a chicken cutlet with some avocado, and I was hopeful. And he took a bite and he instantly spit it out, like he had done countless times before. And naturally, I just felt so much stress rise inside of me because I was kind of a new mom, exhausted, burnt out, trying to get my son to eat. And I was a feeding specialist and I was failing miserably.
Yeah.
And I felt that frustration just build up in my chest like a volcano. And when I looked up at him, like ready to blow up, unfortunately. And in that moment, for the first time, what I saw wasn't resistance. It wasn't him trying I think I broke up for a second. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Just start with,
Okay.
um, oh, just one thing to know with this particular platform, if we use our hands like laterally, it locks for some reason. It's really annoying. Like, so
Okay. I'm gonna just
I know I speak with my hands too. So if you could start
okay.
with that piece of like what you saw.
Okay. Yeah. So honestly, in that moment, I didn't see resistance anymore. He wasn't trying to be difficult. I saw fear. He was stressed and he was really stressful waiting for my reaction.
Hmm.
And it really hit me painfully in that moment that, I wasn't supporting him the right way and I was actually making things worse. So that was really the moment that awoke this different mindset in me when it came to feeding. And I started to research. I started to research what could this mean? Where could this be coming from? And this is when I came across the whole body kind of mindset around feeding, which is not typically the popular mindset to have around eating because it's usually very behaviorally based. But what I found is that once I started to support his whole body, started to support his gut, I started to support his nervous system and other things, and his sensory processing issues, things shifted very quickly for us around the table. And I was very lucky to be able to have that mindset because of my own health issues. Like I was already very deep into holistic mindset and healing for myself. And then I had that light bulb moment go off. Like I have to do the same thing for my son. Like clearly he's having all these symptoms. And everything connected and became kind of clear. And that's how my passion for this was born.
Amazing. Yeah, and you shared earlier when we were offline that your focus really is helping parents more than sort of working one-on-one with the child.
Yes.
And now I can see how, you were in that position. So did you pivot to helping parents when you found out, that that was a better approach than working one-on-one with children, or have you always worked just with parents?
Because I usually worked in a clinical setting, typically I would see a patient or a client for about 30 minutes once a week or twice a week, and feeding usually gets pushed back. For example, I was practicing in North Carolina after I moved from New York, and here services are even harder to come by. So usually speech and language gets approved by insurance, and feeding can be kind of an add-on, but usually you'll get those 2 visits a week. So it's really hard when you have such limited time, and then you get to speak to the parents for about 5 minutes, and then you're like, okay, this is what we did in the session, and here are some things that could be supportive at home. But I feel like there's just such a big disconnect, that I just found that unfortunately, until that environmental piece, and that whole child aspect of things gets addressed, with the parents in mind, there's just very little that unfortunately I can do in that clinical setting.
So this may be obvious, but I'd love to hear your response. Why do parents get so stressed out when their child is picky?
I feel like there is a lot here. Oftentimes it's this guilt because what do we want to do for our kids? We want to give them shelter, protection, and nourishment, right? When we're unable to nourish them and give them that, that can really feel like a failure for a parent, and it's very stressful. So I feel like there's a lot of that. And also, the environment around the table changes once you have a picky eater, because all of a sudden you become like a short order cook. You have to make an extra meal, or you have to cater to a child in a special way. And, there's stress around the table. So you're no longer having like a calm meal with your family, which is supposed to be the time to connect and be together after work, after school, whatever the situation is. And you don't get to have that. So I feel like, that can be very stressful to families.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a sense also of something hardwired in us parents of when our child is eating, that we get almost like a dopamine or serotonin boost from that, just that
Absolutely.
for that moment things are okay.
Oh, absolutely. Exactly.
And so it is stressful. But
Yeah.
it sounds like most parents are misunderstanding like really what's going on here, including myself. I'll be first to admit these scenarios have cropped up in my life, and yeah, it's so hard to understand. And what are we misunderstanding?
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest misconception is that picky eating is a behavior. It's like it's really just the child being stubborn, being difficult, maybe this conception that they're going to outgrow this. And perhaps there is a time and place for that developmentally as kids learn how to eat, but it's usually very short lived. Once it's longer than a few weeks, once it's a pattern that brings a lot of stress to the family and it's over and over, that's really when picky eating is turns really into a deeper issue. And I think it's just misunderstood as a behavior that's going to pass.
Okay, so in your particular example that you used, there was sort of a anxiety about your response or
Mhm.
that your son was experiencing.
Yeah.
Is that pretty typical of this journey?
I think there is a lot of nervous system dysregulation that is kind of behind some of these behaviors and some of these issues. And stress shows up on both sides for the child because they're being asked to do something that feels unsafe in their body, right? Because they're being asked to eat something or in a certain way that they don't feel comfortable. and eating is very invasive. And for the parents, because they're failing, they're not able to feed their child, or they're stressed out because this becomes like this big ordeal and task. So I do think there's a lot of stress that goes along with picky eating.
So the contributors to this, that from more of a science perspective, like that the child's experiencing, and some of the drivers of this behavior, what's going on beneath the surface?
There could be many different triggers for this, right? When we look at the biological perspective, and in my framework, my Bloom framework, B stands for balanced health, right? So it's things like, it could be things like constipation that are setting things off. It could be things like reflux. It could be a diagnosis of PANS and PANDAS. It could be a developmental delay. It could be things like mold exposure. There could be so many environmental factors that bring on these symptoms of picky eating. Could be a lot of things going on there, as well as gut health related things, right? When we have overgrowth, when we have a leaky gut, typically we get unnatural cravings for a lot of carbs and sugar. And just our appetite signaling can be disturbed, our hunger signaling can be disturbed. Just as our rest and digest state is unfortunately affected by a lot of these things. So I'm just touching on the surface here. There could be a lot of different root causes for it. But typically, when something is going on with the child's health or within their gut, picky eating can be a symptom of that.
Okay. So I want to circle back to that a little bit more, but just as to back up on those descriptions of imbalances, when is it a red flag? When should the parents be concerned that this is more than picky eating?
Yeah, I would say if it's longer than a few weeks, if it's something that goes on frequently, once a child doesn't eat entire groups of foods, whether it's protein, whether it's vegetables, whether it's fruit, and they're kind of sticking to a lot of carbs, a lot of sugary foods, that's usually a pretty common red flag for picky eaters. They might be on something called the beige diet, or they only have a handful of foods they will always accept. Once it feels kind of like a chore to parents and they're really managing picky eating daily. And of course, there can be moments when kids become pickier. Maybe they were just sick, right? And maybe their appetite is affected for a few weeks, and that can happen. That's very typical. And I'm kind of cautious using that term, but that can definitely happen. It's developmentally appropriate. But once it becomes more than that, once it's longer, once it's really impacting the family, that's truly when we can think about picky eating.
Okay. And I guess outside of picky eating, what I'm alluding to, is there certain red flags where you would say, hey, this seems different than picky eating? Maybe the parent needs to reach out to general practitioner or what have you. Is there sort of a line that crosses?
Yeah, I think absolutely, because once they're losing weight, once they're kind of like failing, or maybe they're not on the growth chart, they're very small, that could be a concern. Once it's really affecting their health because they're not getting the nutrients they need, or when there's just so much anxiety around eating, when it's becoming like a psychological feeding issue, I definitely think parents should reach out to, a psychologist or their MD, their pediatrician, see where they can be maybe referred out to, or what they can do, how they can support them in that way.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess I would add to that, just sort of a sudden onset of this behavior
Absolutely.
would be a concern, right? I think once you see like a pattern that's established, it's less of a red flag than like an abrupt change.
Absolutely. And that could happen. I've seen that happen many times, where maybe a child gagged on something, or they choked, they had a choking episode. or there was a loud noise where they were eating and now they're associating a lot of stress with eating, and that could happen.
Okay, so
For
let's
brain
talk about the sensory processing aspect
Mm-hmm.
of this, because that seems to be such a well-known mechanism for picky eating.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like what's going on with what's the child experiencing, and
It, it's essentially when their senses are very heightened, right? We have our technically five senses. We have more, but the five basic ones, where they're just feeling it more strongly in relation to food. So maybe just looking at food is overwhelming. It's too much for them to handle. Maybe the smell of it is overwhelming to their system. Maybe tasting it's too much. Maybe even the temperature of food is too much for them to handle, or the texture in their mouth, it feels like something they really can't handle. So then they start gagging, or they start, even vomiting. They have emesis. Like this can happen because their senses are very heightened. And I do see that being a quite common kind of symptom of picky eating.
yeah, yeah. So when you developed your approach and just from your own experiences, what shifted in your just general vibe about the mealtime and navigating these discussions? Like what's the before and after?
That's a great question. Before, it was very much focusing on the amount of foods kids were eating, the amount of bites they were taking, and kind of expanding their palate in a very behavioral way. So, we would have parents would bring in some foods and we would work on maybe trying something new together, and we would count how many bites they took, right? So we're very focused on the here and now, what's in front of us, without looking at their life and their body and really their needs and how their body is truly reacting and what's causing the picky eating. It was just very much focusing on the food, on the plate. Now, with my new approach, it's very much about the child. So, looking at their health, putting things together, what could be causing some of these issues, looking at their gut, looking at their oral motor skills, looking at their swallow, looking at their eating and environment, and looking at what type of boundaries are set around the table and the connection the child has with their caregivers and really with the food. It's really important to look at to get a whole picture.
Yeah, it seems much more like functional, like it versus sort of putting a spotlight on the problem of like the food. You just need to try more food, or
Right.
just overcome it. It seems like
Right.
you're really meeting the child where they're at.
I try to, because I think it's really the way forward. Because again, I think the misconception is that picky eating is a diagnosis. It's not, it's a symptom of something else happening.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think a lot of people, grew up more with like military style parenting, or
Yes.
you know, clean plate club, and all these other messages, and it just feels like you're walking a fine line, I think as a parent. So I'm interested, you said something in that last segment about boundaries. So I'm guessing that you have sort of a healthier way of setting boundaries, but also you're not ignoring that parents have to be parents. So I'd love if you comment on that a little bit.
I think boundaries are very healthy when they're set with your particular child in mind. I do think kids love routines. They love boundaries. They need them so they can learn about the world. They're exploring all the time, but we're there to guide them. They need that guidance from us, right? They're brand new to this planet. There's so much to learn. And I think when I say age appropriate, And also kind of like state appropriate boundaries are what I'm looking for. Because, for example, if a child is having such a severe reaction to smells around the table, perhaps it's, oh, my hands again.
It's okay. You're back.
Okay. So, so perhaps it's, them not being able to sit for dinner with their parents because their smells are overwhelming. So maybe the expectation wouldn't be for them to sit at that table until they're able to better accept the smells or better deal with them, right? And then we would set the boundary. We sit at the table for 20 minutes. Kind of what I mean. We're meeting them where they are functionally and what feels really comfortable for them, because we need to be in that rest and digest state when we're eating. We need to be in our parasympathetic. So if we're stressed out, we're not really going to get them to explore new foods and really enjoy their meals. Or if you have a 2-year-old, you're not going to expect for them to sit there for 20 minutes without breaks and without being able to go over to the table and play with their car, because they need that, and that's developmentally appropriate. So I think it's about setting boundaries that are meeting them where they are, but they're giving them the push that they need in that moment in a way that still feels safe for them, but also takes them a little bit out of their comfort zone so they can start to explore.
Okay. So keeping with this theme of the root contributors of, I've heard, with the swallowing mechanisms that may be just overlooked. What are some of the mechanical problems with chewing and swallowing that parents should be aware of?
Yeah. Well, with chewing, if your child is showing signs of weakness, or so that could be things like pocketing food because it's hard for them to break it down, or they get really tired when they're chewing certain consistencies, when they're constantly maybe gagging on food because they're not breaking the foods down appropriately. It could be many different kind of red flags there where they're just not able to break their foods down. It could be maybe overstuffing too, because they don't have like the proper feedback in their mouth to know like this bite is not ready to be swallowed. So they're swallowing prematurely and putting themselves at risk. With swallowing, we're really worried about the aspiration aspect of things. So things going down the wrong way. So essentially food getting into your lungs. So that's something to explore if the child is coughing, or if they're showing signs of respiratory distress when they are swallowing. Or it could even be silent aspiration, but all of a sudden, maybe they're developing pneumonia quite a bit and we're not really connecting. Where is this coming from? Maybe it's coming from an insufficient swallow. So there could be a lot of things kind of mechanically going on that could be causing some of these issues.
Okay. So with that, is there, I've often wondered, I watch children and they're eating with their families and they're sitting in these adult chairs, and a lot of them, like, their feet aren't touching the ground, and in fact they're just like, a lot of them are just swinging their feet, or it's like they're exercising while they're eating. And I often wonder if, like, is that a core problem? How we're expecting them to sit in these high chairs with no support, and does that feel unsafe to a child?
It could. I mean, for us as adults, we're always looking for stability as well, right? Children are as well. So when their posture is off, maybe they're leaning to the side looking for stability, or maybe they're leaning forward looking for stability, that can definitely impact their swallow in some way, especially as they're learning and exploring new textures and foods and their system is kind of immature. So definitely. So I always, when I'm working with a child, I always talk about this with parents, is finding ways to give them stability. So whether that's using a stool under the chair or having a more supportive high chair, whatever the seating is, you do want a place where you can actually put their feet. Because as adults, like if you sit up and you put your feet up and they're hanging up and you're trying to eat, like it's going to be hard for you.
Yeah.
So think about your kids, it's going to be really hard for them.
Yeah. I mean, you're essentially engaging your abs, while you're eating, and your diaphragm, and it's yeah. So I don't know what the solution is, especially families sitting around the table wanting to have dinner together, and there's all kinds of body sizes at the table. So I'm sure, someone's thought of, besides having just a separate table for the child, I'm sure there's something out there. I just haven't heard of it.
Yeah. Well, some high chairs right now are really supportive and grow with the child, where eventually, like, you even remove the restraints in the seat and it just becomes like an adult chair and you can adjust the stool. Like the Stokie chair does that. But you can also honestly attach like a, something that you can tie around the chair even. I'm trying to think of like
like a
getting
footstool.
creative.
Yeah.
Yeah, like find a way to make a footstool with stuff you already have at home, so it doesn't become like an expense. You can always think of something like that. How can I support a child? And if they're leaning to a side, maybe roll a towel up and like prop them up a little bit so they're more in that 90-degree position as much as they can be.
Yeah. Excellent. So I'd love to hear some stories that you can recall, maybe about a client or a family that you saw some transformations in your work.
Yeah. One really great case comes to mind, and this was a child who was 12. And he came to me as a referral from an integrative pediatrician who's phenomenal. So the doctor did a lot of work in terms of looking at his nutritional deficiencies and seeing what's going on internally with the body and the gut. So we had some great information there. But what we had learned is that because he had such a poor diet, he was really only eating a handful of foods, which were mostly carbs. With a little bit of protein. He was so severely nutritionally depleted that he was essentially starving himself. So once mom came to me, she had a lot of concerns because she was really nervous about his growth. But at the same time, she didn't really want to force him to eat, or she didn't really know what to do. So we really focused on my whole child approach there. We had already a lot of clues from the pediatrician regarding his health component and his gut component. So we started to evaluate the rest of the other things, right? We looked at the boundaries set around the table, and what we learned was that, he really couldn't sit with the family very much because he was so sensory averse to the smells, even to a point where he refused to use the same plates and cutlery as the family because they were eating these unsafe foods with them. So mom had to use like plastic plates and paper plates and cutlery and whatnot. And so we looked at the boundaries there, what the actual dinner and eating situation looked like. We looked at how he was being exposed to foods, how these foods were being shown to him, and what was happening there. And we looked at his oral motor skills. And what we found was that he was chewing for quite a bit of time, but overall his skills were pretty good when it came to oral motor development. But the pediatrician started supplementation, and because of his age, he was very willing to try these different things. So they were able to start to nourish him from that perspective. I spoke to the mom about gut health. We talked a lot about sun exposure and how that influences gut. We talked a lot about the environment, how that influences the gut. We talked about nourishing foods and feeding the birth microbes and different things that she could do that were easy additions to his current diets. He was drinking a smoothie, so mom started to add in some ingredients, very, very tiny things that he was accepting. We also added meat stock to his diet because he would eat matzah soup every week. And so instead of just doing a typical matzah soup, mom swapped out the broth for a meat stock just to nourish his body a little bit more. And it was like these little things and little boundaries we sat around the table that slowly but surely calmed him down, gave him a lot of regulation, gave him the nourishment he needed, that he started to expand his diet.
Mm.
It went from eating just a very specific type of homemade schnitzel to eating homemade fish, eating steak every week, which was a big goal of mom because she really wanted him to have the nutrients from red meat. It turned into trying about 30 different types of vegetables that were his idea, um, going from being chronically fatigued to having energy to play with his brothers and start karate and order things at restaurants. I mean, and it was a pretty quick transformation because once we started to really address this, these biological needs of his and offer him a supportive environment, it was a pretty quick turnaround when it came to eating.
Amazing. Yeah, I love hearing your, sounds like one of your underlying philosophies is healing the gut.
Hmm. It's a big part of this.
That's that's speaking my love language. So
Yes.
it's good stuff. So
Yeah.
and what I'm hearing with that is with the creative ways to get nutrition um, into the body that wouldn't cause additional aversions and
There's definitely ways of doing that. And what's interesting too is that our environment and the sun influence the gut just as much as nutrition does, right? So sometimes it's even lifestyle changes and nervous system regulation that can really be the first things you do before you even address nutrition, if it's such a big issue.
Yeah, I'm curious, the sunlight piece. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so we learned that the sun spectrum is very healing to our body and it greatly influences the gut and microbial diversity and just kind of getting rid of the bad guys. So going out during different times of day, during when the sun is rich in red and infrared light during the morning and in the evening, and UVA light and UVB light for different body functions, is just so key, and it can really turn the gut around quite quickly. It's incredible
That's
for
beautiful.
our microbes.
So don't live in Seattle like me.
This is why I'm in South Carolina.
Yeah, I think a lot of interesting research is coming out on the mitochondrial aspect of the gut,
Absolutely.
and yeah, like you're saying, light is so instrumental in mitochondrial function.
Yes.
So I think that's cutting edge stuff that you're doing.
Oh, well, thank you.
It sounds more like nature cure type philosophy, but I think the more the science is catching up with why is on its way with the look at mitochondria and gut health. So that's
Absolutely.
great advice that you're giving.
Thank you.
So just to recap, can you just review again your core framework, the acronym that you use, and
Yes.
just any more details about that?
Yeah. So my main framework is called the Bloom framework. So B stands for balanced health. So again, looking at any type of symptoms there that could be influencing eating negatively, or any type of diagnoses that could be affecting eating. So things like constipation or nutritional deficiencies, nervous system dysregulation, blood sugar issues, anything like that could be affecting our cravings and our feeding in general. L is learned oral skills, and that means the oral skills in our mouth and also swallowing. So we always assess there to see if they're chewing appropriately, if they can break the food down, if they can actually swallow it safely, because I think that's really important to look at. The first O is optimal microbiome. So again, the gut-brain connection. So looking at that rest and digest, looking at their digestive system, any overgrowth, leaky guts, because that's going to manifest in a lot of picky eating tendencies, such as unusual cravings for those carbs and sugars, and appetite issues and digestion issues. And also it could be things like hunger cues, like maybe not feeling when you're hungry enough, or maybe you're eating too much because you don't really understand when you're full. So that can also be affected there. The second O is open exploration. So making sure they have an environment that allows them to explore. And it doesn't even have to be taking bites. It could be taking it back to maybe even the grocery store or the garden, or just helping prep food that might be more appropriate at first for the child. So they have this opportunity to explore. And the M stands for mealtime boundaries. So setting age appropriate boundaries that are very supportive of their growth, but also taking into account their struggles. So we're not pushing them in those areas that are just going to cause them stress. And I picture it kind of like this big tree, and these are the branches. And at the bottom, by the trunk, is connection. Because once we connect with our child, we're able to really help them regulate, and also we're able to notice these symptoms and notice a lot of things that could be red flags around eating. So that's essentially the framework.
I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think to get to that space, something that I've been recently looking at is for parents to realize that, they are responsible for their child, but the child also has their own journey, in life. And so they are a lot you, but they are a lot themselves. So, it's not always a reflection of your parenting.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times if we can step back from that and just, like you said, be there and connect with them and help them, and not take this approach that it's our fault, that they're going through this. I think then you can actually help the child.
Absolutely. You can meet them where they are.
Well, great. Well, this has been amazing. I want to hear about, how people can work with you and the types of programs you're offering. And then if you could just comment, we dedicate these episodes to various charities. If we're able to reach people with these podcasts, we commit to giving charity to. And you chose a few charities that you have a passion for, and I'd love just as a conclusion, just to hear why you chose those charities.
Yeah. So if anybody wanted to connect with me, they can find me on Lena Livinsky.com. That's my website.
Okay. You're good.
Sorry, we broke up again a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's my website. And I offer one-on-one coaching for parents. So it's usually like a 3-month program where they can work with me specifically around their child. But I'm also starting a group coaching program, which is 8 weeks, and it's more community-based. So parents can work with other families as well, connect with other families. So, because I find that this can be very lonely. It could be a very lonely journey once you're on this journey. And those are my 2 main ones. I also offer just one-off visits where we have a very comprehensive evaluation, and I can give you some advice of how to move forward. But there's many different ways to connect with me. And then I started this workshop recently. It's called Beyond Picky Eating. And every month I'm offering it for free. So if anybody wanted more information, they can just go to lenalivinsky.com/workshop. Yeah, so that's where they can find it. In terms of the charities, I know the first one is Children's Health Defense. I always liked them just because of the messaging they've always had around kind of medical freedom and being able to decide for what you really want to do with your child. And I've always supported that message, and I've always fought for that for us, and I really appreciate that. So I'm a big fan of them. Can you remind me the other two that I
Western
chose?
Price.
Oh, yes. Well, I'm very big, as maybe you can gather from my advice on ancestral living and that type of advice, and in general, just ancestral philosophy. So I'm a big fan of their work as well.
And then the IFFGD, International Foundation of Gastrointestinal Disorders.
Yeah, I just feel like we're speaking about the gut a lot, so I think that research is very important. Um, and I find also that a lot of parents, they're struggling with their children being constipated or having a reflux, and they're just really not getting a lot of answers in that area.
Mhm.
So I would love to see some more cutting edge research there.
Excellent. Well, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been really helpful, and it's going to shed some light on a very important and challenging topic for a lot of people. So thanks again.
Thank you for having me. This was such a great conversation.